political views, orientations, languages, and dialects and academic backgrounds. The rich diversity across the diaspora makes unity that much harder. How do we unite, combine our diverse strengths, and fight as a coalition of one people? Is such a thing even possible? Three great ancestors, Chief Woot, Queen Nzinga, and Marcus Garvey, have already answered those questions for us. The children of Woot. Chief Woot and his achievements have been nearly forgotten, but such was his leadership by example and his dashing legacy that even today the people of his federation are still called the children of Woot. If anybody in here, because this is really one of the first times when I read this article of myself hearing of this individual, if you've heard of Chief Woot, give me a 1. If you've not heard of Chief Woot, give me a 0. This is, when I read this article, this was my first time of hearing of Chief Woot. Well, this is a treat for you. This should be a true treat. Here we go. During the 16th century, so this was in the 1500s, Africa was being surrounded from every direction. The Portuguese began closing in on West Africa, the English and Dutch from the Southern Cape, and the Arabs had a stranglehold on the north and east from Morocco to Zanzibar. So you can see some of the earliest remnants of Western colonialism and imperial conquest, but the Eastern Arab imperialism and colonialism was well afoot in the continent, okay? This complete encirclement forced the original people away from all important sea coasts and into Africa's interior in an attempt to avoid slave traders, warfare, and integration with the alien races coming from every direction. Chief Woot of the Bushong tribe responded to the warring tribes and slave raiders by leading his small group into the Eule Plain of the Kasai region of what is today the Democratic Republic of Congo. Here, Woot established the kingdom of Kuba. The indigenous people of the area, the Kwa and the Kiti, who had lived there since the world began, welcomed Woot as a brother and joined under him as members of the Kuba Federation. Dr. Chancellor Williams teaches us that from the very beginning, the core group of Bushong set an example for nation building for all of Africa. They had a common goal of ridding themselves of their foreign invaders. But few African states ever followed it. First of all, the total population at the formation of the Federation Kingdom, of the Federal Kingdom, can be estimated as between 75 to 100,000, of which the Bushongs were 80%. All the other tribes were only 1/5 of the total population. This means that even under the most liberal democratic systems, the Bushongs could have dominated and ruled all the other tribes by sheer numbers. They did not choose to do so. They transformed the Bushong Village Council of Elders into a council of state in which each tribe, now constituting a constituent province, was represented as an equal by its own chief of or representative of its choice. So instead of centralizing their government around one particular group, they decentralized. Okay, they came to an agreement and a true direct democratic type of construct. I would even call it a communalist in its purest sense. Okay, so as it was throughout Africa, the council represented the people, and therefore all powers not delegated rested with the council. The fact that there was no central authority was a strength, and we're going to come back to this point. It was not a weakness here. I find it very interesting to note that a Wikipedia search of the Kuba Kingdom asserts that there was no real central authority, as if such was to the discredit of the kingdom, because this is a very highly westernized principle of centralizing authority, okay? And it leads, as we know, as we can see today, to oligarchies, to plutocracies, to what they are now calling technocracies, okay? And ultimately to dictatorial, tyrannical systems, okay? The most significant aspect of Chief Woot's leadership was that even the smallest group that comprised the Kingdom of Kuba was represented as having an equal say in the circle. Take note, this is what leadership is all about, people. This is true democracy, what you would even call direct democracy, where the people are truly engaged in the political processes and decision making of the nation. This was an innovation that helped him unify many smaller groups, including the Mongol, Pinde, Ilibe, Showa, Kel, Ka'am, the Kayelwing, the Lulua, the Luba, the Ingindi, the Maluk, the Piang, the Ingumbe, the Being, and the Kufa into a mighty federation. So he had all these diverse groups of tribal people with, I'm sure, different cultural practices, maybe even different dialects. But he unified these people all together. Chief Woot also encouraged diversity rather than trying to crush it and integrate these individual groups, each with their own individual languages, customs, and oral history. Chancellor Williams continues, quote, they not only treated all of the different language groups as equals, but they promoted a national policy of glorifying the cultural variations in any groups which were so outstanding that they should be adopted nationally. Hence, every tribe that in isolation had developed something noteworthy but peculiar to itself could see its unique culture pattern become a national institution and be filled with both pride and gratitude. End quote. So every segment of the Kingdom of Kuba was represented by the overall term Bakuba, or the people of Kuba. Out of many people came one mighty nation. Kuba gave rise to the King General Shayam the Great, one of the greatest leaders in human history, and was responsible for the revolution of 1630, a period of African economic, academic, social, and scientific innovation, unprecedented in the area, and a long line of strong leaders who observed the individual rights and culture of the individuals' diverse groups that they led. So Cuba only fell in the late 19th century when its people turned their backs on the democratic principles laid down by Chief Woot and forgot the great prophecy. From Chief Woot and the great African kingdom of Cuba, we learned that only by uniting diverse groups into a federation where their interests can be represented and their unique culture observed, preserved, and honored can we hope to bring about one unified people. Now, I'm just going to really leave that there. I may read Queen Nzinga. Some of you may not be familiar with Queen Nzinga. Excuse me. But Chief Woot, I want to say, truly is a excellent reference for us as even Israelites, because even when you look at the kingdom of Israel, the nation of Israel, in our diaspora, there are so many variations and cultural expressions of Torah that are inherent and present today within this nation. And this was the attempt of us to really form a federation to unify and to get the representative element of Israel into a dynamic whole. Okay, and so that was the attempt of that. Unfortunately, we didn't really get it to take off much, but nonetheless, there are still efforts being made to unify. And so, very, very great reference, historical reference for us to look to. Okay. I'm gonna read Queen Nzinga. We're all familiar with Garvey, so I'm just gonna read Queen Nzinga. But this is the Black Terror, who is Queen Nzinga. When the first white faces started showing up in the powerful kingdom of Matamba, they were viewed as an opportunity to expand trade and commerce. These new white faces extended their hands in brotherhood as simple traders and were allowed to establish, there's a picture of Queen Nzinga, trading posts in the area. These traders were soon joined by missionaries and then by armed militias. Now, this is the way that they went about colonizing the lands. They sent the traders first, and they send the missionaries to indoctrinate, and then they send their militias to exterminate. Okay? And they all three began sweeping through the countryside in search of slaves to support a capitalistic Europe on the rise. The greed for both human and material capital by the whites became insatiable, and they became increasingly more violent. Whole villages were laid to waste as they began capturing men to sell into labor and beautiful black women to turn into sex slaves. In 1571, Portugal ordered the complete and total conquest of Angola, and there were many Israelites in Angola, and declared the country a Portuguese colony in 1575. Now, keep in mind, this trade began back in 1444. Okay, under Dom de Versailles of Pope Nicholas V and King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Portugal. This is when this started in Portugal. However, now we see the expansion of this here when they're now starting to colonize the continent. So confident that they could do with the Africans as they wished, the Portuguese went insane with bloodlust and greed. But their behavior would not go without consequence, for they gave rise to who they would call the Black Terror and the leader of the First War of Liberation, Queen Nzinga. This is a woman who was leading her people against the onslaught of European enemies. Excuse me, y'all. Give me 1 second again. I had a young one who was completely melting down, so I had to go and get him quiet. But here we go. Nzinga was born as heir to the throne of Angola as the sister of the king. The king had cooperated with the Portuguese for years in an effort to appease them and to stop the merciless slaughter of so many of his people. His attempts had led to the capture and enslavement of hundreds of chiefs under his rule, who the Portuguese then replaced with their own governors. So they exhibited, some of the first elements of what is called neo-colonialism right here. Okay? This is a neo-colonial rule when they replace leaders with their own leaders. Okay? Now, it may have been someone who was actually of Portuguese descent, but even if it was not, and it was someone who was from Angola, that would still be a form of neo-colonialism. This is all colonial. But Nzinga saw the foolishness in the king's cooperation with these new white devils and openly opposed him. Her opposition earned her the love of her people, who flocked to her side. When the king died in 1623, Nzinga rose to the throne and would make Portugal suffer, look at that, for 40 years. Because of her unwillingness to side with the enemy or cooperate with them in exchange for material wealth or safety, the people rallied to her side. She declared her kingdom a free zone where slavery was forbidden, and any slave that could escape would be under her protection and forever free. She was indeed the first abolitionist. Queen Nzinga could have become rich and powerful by following the path of her brother, but chose instead to follow a path of righteousness and resistance. She made what M70 just identified as a sacrifice, knowing that her life was at risk against this foreign European invasion. She understood that any so-called leader that does not have the moral courage to fight for what is right is subject to suspicion by the people. More importantly, Queen Nzinga understood that although people may be temporarily united by wealth and commercial interests, only the fight for liberty and self-determination in opposition to evil would be able to mobilize the millions. And I'm going to leave it on that. We're all well aware of the story of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, but let's go down to putting it all together. So if you have read this far, you're better than 80% of the visitors, dabblers, and internet surfers who have seen this article. You now have the keys to solve the biggest problems that we face as a people. Remember the lessons of the ancestors. Woot. Okay, Selah Basetta and Mikhail got you. So rather than trying to dominate and uniform the diverse people in groups of people that we seek to unite, We must create federations, listen to that, that respect and honor the unique and individual customs, beliefs, and cultures of the people that we unite. Remember the lesson of our great Queen Nzinga: the promise of material gain is never enough for people. Appeal to the higher ideals that we all seek: freedom, justice, peace, and safety. And finally, let us never forget the wisdom of the ancestor Marcus Garvey. Intent and desire are not enough to unite a people. Nations are built on the foundations of organization, knowledge, and action. Selah. Very. And we're going to, in that particular vein, the offering of leadership and nation building. This next article again comes to us from Pan-African Alliance. We're going to take a look at another leader by the name of Jomo Kenyatta. So when you access this article, give me a 4. Bavakasha. As the name of this article is entitled, 6 Ways Jomo Kenyatta Can Make You a Better Leader. You can see a picture of the great Jomo Kenyatta, the leader of the Mau Mau people, or the Mau Mau guerrillas, the warriors who were fighting in Kenya. He starts with a quote. Again, this is Asad Malik saying, when the missionaries arrived, the Africans had the land and the missionaries had the Bible. They taught us to pray with our eyes closed. When we opened them, they had the land and we had the Bible. Jomo Kenyatta. And of course, this is the Western Christian imperial conquest in which they completely corrupted and misappropriated the scriptures to fit their agenda. It's kind of like the movie The Book of Eden, if you've seen that, where the antagonist wanted the Bible to amass his power and his might. But let's go ahead. We got 34 people here. I got 5 4s. I know you all are with me. Hopefully you are. Told Rabbi for those who go ahead and went ahead and posted the 4. So this is a pretty lengthy read. I'm just going to kind of go over some of the things here. But let's go over this. So one of the missing elements of the Black conscious movement is a lack of leadership. You can't hear me? I'm not being heard. Mic drop. If I can be heard, give me a 4. Hallelujah. All right. Did you all hear the quote that I read as far as when the missionaries arrived? So this is usually attributed to like Bishop Tutu. But this was actually a quote from Jomo Kenyatta. Okay, the leader of the Mau Mau people, the guerrilla fought against them there. So here we go. Lack of leadership. And this is why Get in Nation Building is the name of this presentation, because what we need is, particularly as Israelites, is to understand leadership. Okay? And that does not mean that there are specific leaders. That means that everyone has a role to play in the construct of the nation. Okay? Everyone has to lead in their respective right and field. Okay? So I don't mean the hyper egotistical leadership that we see today, but genuine leadership that both encourages and commends the deserving while correcting the wayward with right knowledge. In studying Black history, these are the leadership lessons that we should glean from those who have succeeded where we are failing. Okay, so he says this is actually 3 separate pages, and then you'll see where you can click on the next page on the bottom. So who is Jomo Kenyatta? Jomo Kenyatta was an important and influential revolutionary in Africa. He is the one responsible for leading Kenya to independence and setting up the country as a relatively prosperous capitalist state. Now, I'm not necessarily in agreement with removing the shackles of capitalism and then getting into a capitalist system ourselves, but you can see where it was a system that was pretty much already in place that he more than likely just continued to service and to utilize. He pursued a moderate pro-Western, anti-communist economic philosophy and foreign policy, oversaw a peaceful land reform process, built independent institutions, and oversaw Kenyans' admission into the United Nations. During his reign, the country was peaceful and stable. The economy developed and grew rapidly and attracted high levels of foreign investment, and a black Kenyan professional and business middle class was established. Born into the dominant Kenyan Kikuyu culture, Kenyatta became its most famous interpreter of Kikuyu traditions through his book, Facing Mount Kenya. This post will examine the leadership behind one of the most successful African administrations of the 20th century. The first lesson, make a name for yourself. Kenyatta was born in 1890 with the name Kamu wa Ngengi. It wasn't until he was baptized a Christian and given the name John Peter that he rejected white culture and changed his name to Jomo. During World War I, able-bodied Kikuyu were forced into work by the British authorities. To avoid this, Jomo took refuge with the Maasai, where he worked as a clerk. He took to wearing a traditional beaded belt known as a Kenyatta, a Swahili word which means light of Kenya. By 1922, Kamau had fully adopted the name Jomo, a Kikuyu name meaning burning spear, Kenyatta. In that same year, he joined the East African Association, an organization to campaign for the return of Kikuyu lands given over to white settlers when the country became the British Crown Colony of Kenya in 1920. A name is one's direct link to one's history, one's culture, and thus to one's psychological bearings. It was only after reclaiming his cultural name and beginning tradition anew that Jomo Kenyatta made the transition from John Peter to a revolutionary freedom fighter. Lesson 2, clearly communicate your mission. So this is what we just heard from Dr. Wade Nobles, okay? As far as the AP and the AP, okay? It slips my mind what the APs were, but he was saying to clearly state what your priorities are, pretty much for the most point, the purpose and your priority, okay? Early in his rise to power, it is. I mean, this is all in the same spirit, Ben Sion. Yes, indeed. You can see that with Mugabe today. Early in his rise to power, Kenyatta set out his 5-point party platform. These 5 points were: 1, the security of land tenure and the demand for land taken by European settlers to be returned. 2, improved educational opportunities for black Africans. 3, the repeal of crushing hut and poll taxes. 4, representation for black Africans in the legislative council. And 5, freedom to pursue traditional customs. And he has in parentheses here, such as female genital mutilation, which I'm not in agreement with whatsoever. But his letter concluded by saying that a failure to satisfy these points must inevitably result in a dangerous explosion, the one thing all sane men would wish to avoid. So organizational leadership must always be centered around a very specific mission, which is established upon an ideology. The ideology informs the mission. If we do not have an ideology, our mission will never be achieved, because it is the ideology that centralizes and unifies the people, okay? I'm not talking about the government, but I'm talking about the people center themselves around the idea. And that's where leadership emanates from, okay? The idea is what inspires leaders to rise and to carry out that action, okay? So it's not the other way where the leader gives the idea for the people. No, the idea is what is central, okay? So the civil rights movement here in America was successful due to the ability of its leadership to focus on a handful of objectives: repeal of Jim Crow laws, desegregation, establishment of voting rights. Compare these objectives with the objectives of the Occupy movement. Wait, what are the objectives of the Occupy movement? Exactly. Without a mission that is clearly communicated to and understood by subordinates, I won't even call them subordinates, we will call them the people, There are no markers to indicate whether the organization is moving in the right direction. With a clear and well-defined mission, your ability to attract supporters will multiply. You will see number 2 under the make a choice, take a stand, particular little thing in the middle. Go ahead and click on number 2. And if you don't see that, what I'm going to do for you is go ahead and post the link in the room that you can get that. So when you're on page 2, give me a 4 to know that you've gotten it. We're going to go ahead and move on. Go and give me a 4 when you access page 2. Hallelujah. So you can see him here with some leaders with Kwame Nkrumah. It looks like that may be Sekou Touré in there. A couple other individuals. Lesson 3, unify with like-minded leaders. Oftentimes, when two leaders in the black community encounter one another, there is conflict. Not only is this counterproductive, it is self-destructive. Jomo Kenyatta entered politics after taking interest in the political activities of revolutionary African leaders like James B. Atal and Joseph Kengeti, leaders of Kenya's Kikuyu Central Association. He joined KCA in 1924 and rose up the ranks of the association. Eventually, he began to edit the movement's Kikuyu newspaper. By 1928, he had become the KCA's general secretary. On behalf of the organization, Kenyatta launched a monthly Kikuyu language newspaper called Mwigwithanya, Kikuyu word meaning he who brings together, which was intended to draw all sections of the Kikuyu together. The paper, supported by an Asian-owned printing press, had a mild and unassuming tone and was tolerated by the British authorities. However, that would not last long. When Kenyatta went away to school and enrolled at University College in London around 35, he had already made a name for himself. The advent of World War II cut Kenyatta off from Africa, and he was forced to remain in the UK, where he became involved with a group of Pan-Africanists. His house became a regular meeting place for Kwame Nkrumah, Marcus Garvey, novelist Peter Abrahams, journalist Isaac Wallace Johnson, Harry Mwanga and Kubala, as well as George Padmore and C.L.R. James from the Caribbean. Together, they formed the Pan-African Federation. There's another federation. The Congress discussed plans for nationalist movements across the entire continent of Africa, demanded independence from colonial rule and an end to racial discrimination, and set the groundwork for African unity. Such things could not have been accomplished without unity. While each leader intellectually competed with one another, they found value in putting their differences aside in the service of Africa and Africans. You can click on number 3 now on the bottom. As we're going to get to the 3rd page, I'll give you the link there. And when you post this in M70, you don't have to put all these different links in. Just put in the main link. The 4th lesson is to pay your academic dues. Jomo Kenyatta was an intellectual giant and a lifelong learner. Even as he rose through the ranks of his political organization, he remained a student and would invest 15 years of his life from 1931 until 1946 away from Kenya to advance his education in Russia and the United Kingdom. After completing a year of study at Selly Oaks College in Great Britain, Kenyatta traveled to Moscow to study economics and communism at Moscow State University under the sponsorship of Caribbean Pan-Africanist George Padmore. In 1934, Kenyatta returned to London to attend University College, where he created an English Kikuyu dictionary. The following year, he transferred to the London School of Economics to study social anthropology under the renowned Polish anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski. Malinowski was a significant influence in Kenyatta's life and steered Kenyatta in his thesis on Kikuyu culture and tradition. In 1946, when he returned to his homeland, his intellectual pursuits had earned him a position as the principal of Kenya Teachers College, Githunguri. He was also invited to lead the newly formed Kenya-Africa Union, of which he became president in 1947. Over the next few years, Kenyatta traveled and lectured around the country, condemning laziness, robbery, and urging hard work while campaigning for the return of land given to white settlers and for independence. And the last page here, page 4, excuse me. I don't really like how they separate these articles like this. You know, you can just go ahead and post it all together. Keep it smooth, you know. So, the next lesson 5, be ready, willing to pay the price. This is where the offeringship truly comes. Great leaders are defined not by the opportunities they are given, but by their response to adversity. Everybody have red dots? In 1952, Kenyatta was implicated in a plot called the Mau Mau Rebellion and was arrested with 5 others on the charges of managing and being a member of the radical anti-colonial, quote-unquote, I'm going to call it a freedom fighter, Mau Mau Society. If you're not familiar with the Mau Maus, look up the Mau Maus. Very powerful group. The accused were known as the Kapenguria Six. The months-long trial was a BS sham, of course, and lasted 5 months. Rasan Macharia, the main prosecution witness, turned out to have perjured himself. The judge, who was bribed and maintained secret contact with the colonial governor during the trial, was openly hostile to the defendant's cause. The defense, led by a British lawyer, argued that the white settlers were trying to scapegoat Kenyatta and that there was no evidence tying him to the Mau Mau. The court sentenced Kenyatta on April 8, 1953 to 7 years imprisonment with hard labor and indefinite restriction thereafter. The subsequent appeal was refused by the British Privy Council in 1954. Kenyatta remained in prison until 1959, after which he was detained in Lodwar, a remote part of Kenya. The Mau Mau Rebellion had been crushed by the British Army, and the state of emergency was lifted on 10 November 1960. On 21 August 1961, Kenyatta was finally released on the condition that he didn't run for public office. Kenya defied the condition and ran anyway, using the British government's own one-man, one-vote law against him. On 28 February 1960, a public meeting of 25,000 in Nairobi demanded his release. On 15 April 1960, over 1 million signatures for a plea to release him were presented to the governor. On 14 May 1960, he was elected KANU president in absentia. On 23 March 1961, Kenyan leaders, including Daniel Arap Moi, later his longtime vice president and successor as president, visited him at Lodwar. On 11 April 1961, he was moved to Mar-a-Lago with daughter Margaret, where he met world press for the first time in 8 years. On 14 August 1961, he was released and brought to Gatundu to a hero's welcome. By 1960, the British government had started to concede Kenyan rule. And in 1962, Kenyatta went to the Lancaster Conference in London to negotiate the terms of Kenya's independence. So throughout his imprisonment, he remained faithful to the idea of liberation for his people. It was the idea that motivated him and kept him centered and rooted. Without that idea truly resonating within his being and emanating from within, he would have given up. But he had vision. He had dedication, the true marks of leadership. He had commitment, perseverance. Indeed, M70, that was the whole purpose, was to keep him, who was pretty much their intellectual head, in exile. Because they knew with his influence that it would be that much more ruinous to the empire. But the beautiful thing, you can be assured what Kenyatta did, was he groomed other people. And he led them by example so that they weren't completely restricted to his leadership. A true leader produces other leaders. That's what this is about. So, in May 1963, KANU won the pre-independence election and formed a provisional government. When independence was achieved on 12 December that year, Kenyatta was prime minister. Exactly 1 year later, with the proclamation of a republic, Kenyatta became Kenya's first president. Listen to that. What a marvelous story. Like every other revolutionary that gained immortality, Kenyatta endured his incarceration without giving up his mission. Be prepared for the adversity that is sure to accompany your rise to prominence. How you handle your crucifixion, your offering, your Holocaust can mean the difference between success and failure. In lesson 6, beware the fatal flaw of favoritism. Shortly after his release, elections were held pitting Kenyatta's Kenya African National Union, which advocated for Kenya to be a unitary state, against KADU, the Kenyan African Democratic Union, which advocated for Kenya to be an ethnic federal state. KANU beat KADU by winning 83 seats out of 124. On 1 June 1963, Kenyatta became Prime Minister of the autonomous Kenyan government. On 1 June 1964, Kenyatta was sworn in as president and immediately had Parliament amend the Constitution to make Kenya a republic, with him as the head of the state, head of government, and commander-in-chief of the armed forces. His policy was that of continuity and gradual Africanization of the government, keeping many colonial civil servants in their old jobs as they were gradually replaced by Kenyans. He asked for British troops' help against Somali rebels, the Shiftas, in the northeast, and in ending an army mutiny in Nairobi in January 1964. Kenyatta's family and political friends had gained considerable wealth at the expense of the average Kenyan during his administration. Because of his favoritism, Kenya became a de facto confederation of competing tribes instead of a unified country. Also, his resettlement on many Kikuyu tribesmen in the country's Rift Valley province is widely considered to have been unfair to every other ethnic group in Kenya. Here in Black America, we see many organizations that claim to promote the good of the race, but that instead serve only a few favorite cliques. The Nation of Islam accepts and helps only its own members to the exclusion of the rest of Black America. The NAACP has proved they are only interested in helping those that will provide them with good PR, as opposed to truly advancing the race. The fatal flaw of favoritism is the resulting resentment of the people who find themselves excluded from the benefits given to those who neither need or deserve reward. Once this resentment reaches its tipping point, the masses revolt against these groups, sometimes violently. True leaders must show themselves to be just and equitable. If you find yourself in a position of leadership, you should only show favoritism to your specific cause, not to your personal cliques. United Black America tells the story of a revolutionary African leaders like Jomo Kenyatta, so that we may learn from their successes and mistakes in order to create a future united Black kingdom. I'm going to call that a Black America. Some people got the wrong vision and mission in mind. If you enjoyed this article, consider subscribing or dropping us a comment. Peace, he says. Now, the beautiful thing about favoritism in Scripture is we know Torah does not allow for that. Torah does not allow for partiality to be shown to the rich, to the poor, to anyone. There's no partiality in Torah, as Yah is not one who is impartial to the individuals. Okay, and this is why when you read in Galatians 3, it talks about there's neither free nor slave, there's neither male nor female, there's neither Yehudi or Greek in Mashiach, for all are made a new creature. And this means that Mashiach is the idea that we center ourselves in becoming that, in order to administer this kingdom and play our given role based on the gifts that we have in making the body edified and the kingdom effectively and efficiently administered. And that's what this is truly about. That is what this is truly about. Now, as we look towards nation building, this is an article written by a European in the African Executive. And when you access this article, give me a 4. But this article is very interesting because, again, even with Israel, we as a people are by and large not looking in that direction. We're not seeing the potential and the actual riches of the particular land of Israel, but in the entire continent of Africa. We are afraid of anything related to Africa and going in that direction. But this article will show you that Africa is in the crosshairs of Europe. They're licking their chops at the African continent, which includes Israel. So, hold out for your fours. This article is entitled, listen to the title of it, Infrastructure and Prosperity in Africa. This article was written this month. This is by James Duderidge. He is the UK Minister for Africa. This is, again, the United Kingdom. This is Britain. He says, I've been lucky enough to revisit many of the African countries that are close to my heart. Listen to that. I've traveled across the continent, met people doing important work, and spoken at many events on the enormous economic potential and commercial opportunities that can be found right across Africa. The enormous economic potential and commercial opportunities. You think these Europeans aren't salivating over this? But we are so blinded in our connection and commitment to the continent. We don't want to give back. We don't even want to go back, by and large. We got the blinders on. But let's take these blinders off for a moment and take a look at how Europeans, particularly the English, at one time one of the largest colonizers of Africa, are looking at it today. It is unwise to generalize in a continent as diverse as Africa. But despite the global economic slowdown, growth across the continent has remained generally positive this year. They're almost unaffected by the global economic slowdown. While the IMF's latest predictions are for a reduction in growth in sub-Saharan Africa to 3.8%, this is still above the predicted global growth rate of 3.1%. This is rather good. George Osborne would be very pleased with the 3.8%, and he is the Secretary of the what is it? The Commerce in London City. They're going to mention London City in this article too, by the way. So he would be very pleased to say, "Oh yes, we will put more of our investments into Africa based on this 3.8%, which is a 0.7% higher than the global growth rate." In fact, except for one small blip in the 90s, as a region, Sub-Saharan Africa has experienced consistent growth year on year. Sub-Saharan Africa. We ain't even talking about Ethiopia and Egypt and the West Nigeria. We're talking about the continents in South Africa. The situation is difficult. Let me go back and read this last sentence. It is a great place for long-term investment. Africa is a great place for long-term investment. The situation is difficult for the few large oil-producing economies, but experts believe that the majority of low-income countries will continue to grow. Countries such as Cote d'Ivoire, where I'll be in 3 weeks' time, Mozambique and Tanzania, where I was last week, all high-level prosperity partners hope to see growth of around, listen to this, 7% this year. So these countries are looking forward to a 7% growth of their economy this year. Okay? That's very high, very strong. Yes, indeed. We need action. We just talked about leaders and having their mission and their organization, and most importantly, their action in order to create enabling environments that support economic growth in Africa. Now, who is he writing this to? Is he writing this to Europeans? More than likely he is, but the African executive found this article and put it in theirs, in their particular website. Action that encourages innovation and unleashes the entrepreneurial spirit of the young. Action to meet the aspirations of the continent's growing youth population. African governments have a crucial role to play, creating good governance mechanisms. Here's where we get to nation building, people. These mechanisms encourage transparency and tackle corruption, regulatory frameworks that allow business to operate and invest responsibly, and strong and independent institutions that respect the rule of law. Looking ahead, the UN estimates that Africa's population, listen to this, will double to 2.5 billion people by 2050. That's 2.5 billion people with a B by 2050, which is just 34 years away, y'all. 34 years away. Some of us may be here still. So 2.5 billion people in Africa right now. It's about 1.2 billion. South America has about 97 million African people. North America has about 40 million African people. So there's already 2-point-something billion African people on Earth. What is our hang up? What is our problem? How are we suffering so much when there's so many of us? So consider this. Consider this, Israel. Now, I know numbers aren't always, everything, but it's important. We need to understand how to qualitatively organize these numbers. There you go, Yirmiyahu. Yes, indeed, Aki. That's the problem. Our leadership is not in place. The World Bank predicts that at least 600 million people will enter the job market in Africa. 600 million will enter the job market in Africa in the next 15 years. That is a massive opportunity. Huge investment is required to create jobs. This is what we have to understand. And improve infrastructure in order to meet the demands of a rapidly growing population. Infrastructure that facilitates trade rather than hinders it, so that it no longer takes more time for a container to cross a couple of African borders than it does for the same container to be shipped from Hong Kong to Dar es Salaam. Infrastructure is a pipeline for money. Airports, railways, and roads are all pipelines for economic activity. This requires local knowledge and skills, but also global expertise and help to get people and money moving. This is where we have to be prepared for this. We have to get the infrastructure together. Then we have to learn to organize this. Then we have to know how to govern these matters. Are we prepared? This is what we have to ask ourselves continually. Are we prepared to effectively run a kingdom, to govern the world? This is what we're called to do as a kingdom of priests and a set-apart nation. Let's not fool ourselves. It's a major undertaking, people. So let's put this in perspective. It is vital that we build partnerships between the private and public sector, working together in Africa, working for the benefit of millions of Africans, working to deliver the transformational change that the continent needs to unlock growth. Listen to the spirit of this and grow the taxation base. Not that so much, but listen to the spirit of this. Such partnerships will be essential to help grow Africa out of poverty. So too are the partnerships between the UK and countries across Africa. The high-level prosperity partnerships forged between the UK and Angola, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Mozambique, and Tanzania emphasize that the UK, there it is, licking their chops, wants to work more closely with these countries and to work with others across the continent. Now, we have to set the terms for this as a people, as Africans. They don't set the terms of what goes on in our land, but that has happened for far too long. They've set the terms and they've established the relationship. No, this is our land. This is what we have to understand, even in the diaspora. We have ownership, rightful to the continent of Africa. We determine what's what on that particular landmass. The prosperity partnerships place the private sector in the driving seat of economic transformation. Allowing the private sector to flourish creates jobs and generates taxes. Taxes fund vital services such as health and education. A better educated, healthier workforce will create the entrepreneurs and innovative business of tomorrow. The virtuous circle can sustain African growth, and the UK is ready to play an important part. I bet you devils are. But if we're not playing the most important part in this equation, it's a wrap. The colonialism and the neo-colonialism and the imperialism will continue to rape the continent. That's what these devils' intentions are. They're not really looking to improve the continent for Africans. Let's not be deceived. But keep in mind, this article has a lot of veneer to it. There's a lot of mirrors and smoke that are completely inherent in this article as relates to the UK's true position. They've never looked favorably to the continent as far as relates to the indigenous people. So let's not fool ourselves. UK companies have skills and expertise from project design through planning and implementation. So hello, can we get some project designers? Bedas, are you in here, Aki? Brother Nzube, are you in here? If you in here, give me a one, Nzube. That's your strength, I don't know if the brother's still in here or not today. This is a brother from Kenya that we fellowship with, who's expert in project design and planning and implementation. But this is what we have to get accustomed to. British architects, professional services, legal firms, and capital markets are among the best in the world. So where are ours at? Where are our architects, professional services, legal firms, and capital markets? Where are our institutions? Huh? And they're ready to support the infrastructure development on the continent because they're going to make profits from it. But where are our institutions? And of course, here we go. I told you, the city of London, we know that is one of the most lawless districts on earth, is the place in the world to raise capital and a repository of a great deal of wisdom on how to deliver successful partnerships between the public and private sectors. I would not want to do business with those devils. So what are we doing to secure our place and be more self-determined as a continent? This is what we have to think about. How do we establish our own kingdom and dictate our terms to other people? Because right now, we're just taking orders. The UK's extensive aid program, part of our commitment to spending 0.7% of gross national income on overseas development, also recognizes the importance of partnerships with the private sector to drive forward economic development. We have a new prosperity fund of £1.3 billion over 5 years with the aim of fostering economic growth. When they invest, they're not looking to just, put money in and say, okay, now do with it as you want. No, they're looking to own things, people. £1.3 billion over 5 years to invest in Africa with the aim of fostering economic growth so that they can not only own it, but get returns on it. Come on, people. We got to get it going. Part of this fund will be used to help Africa grow out of poverty. Yeah, the parts that you want for your people. Just last week, I was in Tanzania, where I saw for myself how cities with weak infrastructure are crippled by events as mundane as heavy rain. The infrastructure deficit was clearly visible. Now, we know ACON is putting all kinds of light throughout the continent, but that's just one element, okay, and one aspect of it. The rapid transport system is sadly not yet up and running. There is no quick fix. I was talking to Paul Colley about urbanization in Africa and the need for a flexible job market. Big infrastructure projects take time to implement, but it is good that the Department for Internal Development is supporting a Government of Tanzania program. Here we go again with the World Bank. Why are we dealing with these devils? To make the city of Dar es Salaam more resilient to these extreme weather events. The problems of congestion and inefficiency as Dar es Salaam port are well known. That is why the UK government is helping Tanzania unlock the potential of this maritime gateway. There's the law of the sea again. In supporting Trademark East Africa to work on the immediate congestion problems. We are supporting critical feasibility studies necessary for the government of Tanzania to secure bigger finance through the World Bank. With greater funding, Tanzania can improve the port infrastructure and realize the regional trade benefits that will come from improved freight corridors across Tanzania. I'm just going to end it on that note right there. But that's just to let you know of the potentials that are present in the continent of Africa. I have two more articles to get us through, and then I will yield this mic, and we'll get to the next segment of this particular day. When you access this next article, Bavakasha, give me a 4. Very, very important article. This is written by South African former Prime Minister of Kenya and the court leader, Honorable Raila Odinga. It is called Africa Must Rethink Governance. We must rethink the way that we govern. Okay? It starts out with a bunch of paradox. Listen to this. Africa is endowed with human and mineral resources, but Africa is also the poorest continent on earth. Africa has huge tracts of arable land, but Africa remains a net importer of food. Africa spends about 45 billion US dollars on food imports annually. That is money gone. If you have that much arable land, why are you importing so much food? And it's probably not even healthy for you. We have lakes and permanent rivers, but our people suffer severe droughts and the majority lack clean drinking water. Listen to this. This poorest continent is, however, home to some of the world's wealthiest men and women, mostly leaders and former leaders, and their associates who can buy any property at any price in any city at any time. This is because they were not true leaders. They were exploiters. Okay? They bowed to the god of commerce instead of sacrificing for their people. These paradoxes have to do with the way Africa has been governed. At independence, most African nations abandoned the democratic multi-party constitutions inherited from the colonialists and embraced the one-party rule. This gave us presidents for life, military coups, counter coups, and assassinations. It bred personalization of state power and mega corruption amid proclamations by the leaders that democracy was not African. Okay? So they made the view that the people's input into the way that the system is ran is not African. The people say doesn't matter. It's not African. So this is what the leaders duped the people on. The attitude of the leaders of this era was captured in one statement attributed in 1991 to the then 84-year-old Felix Houphouët-Boigny of Côte d'Ivoire. After 29 years rule, Boigny said, "There's no number 2 or 3 or 4 in Côte d'Ivoire. There's only number 1. That's me, and I don't share my decisions." In other words, he underlined the problem of governance Africa was going through. Boigny ensured stability and economic growth in his country, but the nation he left behind exploded after his death. I had the honor of mediating in that country's conflict in 2011. Watching Côte d'Ivoire on the brink, I could not help but think of the words of William Shakespeare and Julius Caesar. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is often interred with their bones. During this period, elections were luxuries in Africa. They were held merely to affirm the incumbent. By the end of the 80s, out of some 150 heads of state that had governed Africa from 1960s, only 6 had voluntarily relinquished power. Even those retired after 20 years or more in office. It is in this period that South Korea, whose GNP was not very different from Kenya's in the early 60s, we just read that not too long ago, although this was in the 30s with, this was in the 60s with Jomo Kenyatta, okay? So this was with Kenyatta here, but it opened its lead over this honorable Odinga's country. Today, South Korea's economy is more than 40 times larger than Kenya's. So it started out on the same pace, but it has mushroomed Kenya's economy. This period failed to create governments that are transparent and accountable. Africa marked time here until the fall of the Berlin Wall. Then emerged what we call the second liberation of Africa in the 90s, with the rallying call being accountability, transparency, and good governance. We can safely proclaim that Africa has changed. Elections have become competitive. Markets have been largely liberalized. Citizens are demanding a voice in the affairs of state, and governments are more open than before. The democracy dividend has resulted in 6 of the world's 10 largest growing countries being in Africa. 6 out of 10, 60% of the world's fastest growing economies are in Africa. This is a monumental leap considering that from 74 through the mid 90s, Africa's growth was negative, reaching negative 1.5% in 90 through 94. So in a decade, Africa has truly transformed. Beat us, I'm glad you're back, man. We were just talking about project design, implementation, and so on and so forth. And I know that's one of your strengths. As we're reading one of the former prime ministers of Kenya here, dealing with a new way to govern Africa. Africa must think of a new governance. This is the name of this particular article here. So in the previous 20 years, it shrank by nearly, let me go back, Slikai. Secondary school enrollment in sub-Saharan Africa grew by 48% between 2000 and 2008. Life expectancy across Africa increased by about 10%, and child mortality rates have been falling in most countries. Whereas you look in Europe, this is the exact opposite, people. Everything is inverting, okay? The scale is tipping back to the side of Africa right now. And this is not by mistake or by chance or by coincidence. This is divine, okay? Truly, this is divine. Over the past 10 years, real income per person has increased by more than 30%. In the previous 20 years, it shrank by nearly 10%. Over the next decade, Africa's GDP is expected to rise by an average of 6% per year. Listen to this. This is partly due to foreign direct investment, improved management of public resources, and political stability. Foreign domestic investment rose from $15 billion in 2002 to $37 billion in 2006 and $46 billion in 2012. These are democracy dividends. So these investors have increased Africa's GDP as well, okay? This is what is all in, is creating this. All this is a major factor in Africa's rise to power. And the middle class is huge. It's taking a huge increase in Africa. Whereas when you look in America, for instance, the middle class is being absolutely wiped out. So we got to really just put the pieces on the table, look at them, and understand where we need to be in this time. It's a no-brainer when you really look at it. It's a no-brainer. Go back to Africa gladly. This is what we need to understand. We should be like, man, dang, why didn't I think of that? And they mean it in the most hateful way, but they don't understand if we do that, we're wiping everything out when we go there. We're wiping it out. Everything that's been opposed to us, we're wiping it out when we get back to our land. Because that is where our power is found. So lately, it is not clear that momentum for change is being sustained. Africa is beginning to send mixed signals on democracy and governance. Our march to democracy is increasingly getting fragile and contestable. When bright spots emerge, they meet reversals on the same continent. Nigeria, the long troubled giant of the continent, seems to be putting its act together. We are proud of progress in Ghana and Ivory Coast. We hope that these countries will sustain the gains and pull up the rest of the continent. But as Nigeria, Ivory Coast, and Ghana rise, some neighbors are embracing old troubles. In March 2012, Mali, a country previously regarded as a success story, underwent a military coup. Although Mali is back from the brink, it is not yet the country that was once listed among those spearheading Africa's renaissance. And I'm not going to read the rest of this article. I'm going to leave this off to you to read here, because what we got to understand is anywhere you're seeing conflict in Africa, do understand that it is part of neocolonialism. Recently in Cameroon, their military captured a French helicopter delivering weapons to Boko Haram. So you can best believe that the rebel or the radical groups that are raising up in the African continent are Western sponsored. Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, ISIS, name any group you want to name in the continent of Africa. They are all sponsored by Western interests. Okay? So when we understand this, you'll see why these different countries in the continent of Africa in particular are racked with all these issues. Okay? But we need to rethink governance. And on that note, this last article prayerfully will contextualize everything. So let's take a look at this article and see what we get. What is governance? What is the most effective form of governance? And most importantly, what type of governance does our Elohim, Yah, expect from us? When you access this article, give me a 4. This comes to us from a website called Christian and State. It has the word Christian in it, but it's a pretty good examination of this particular relationship between faith and politics. This article is entitled Judges, a Christian Anarchist Bible Study. So we're going to look at the principles of this. Of course, we in this room do not identify as Christian, but this article is very sound in its assessment of governance as relates to scriptural government. So, here we go. The scripture records a time after Moshe and then Yehoshua, and before Israel forsook theocracy for monarchy, the period of the judges. Most believers commonly view the period as one of darkness, chaos, and anarchy. The last verse in the book of Judges duly notes that in those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Judges 21:25. Some have taken this as a divine criticism of this period. Somehow, they think that in the scriptures, Yah must be speaking of the organization of his people during that time as being deficient. However, it would be well for many of us to reconsider the notion and especially not to move too fast through Judges chapter 2. First, to recapitulate, Israel was under a theocracy. What is a theocracy? Can someone, let me go ahead and get it and type it in for you all. What is a theocracy, okay? A theocracy is this. This works. Didn't work. Okay, let's do this thing. A system of government in which priests rule in the name of Yah. I'm just going to leave that right there. A system of government in which priests rule in the name of the Most High. Now, let me even add this to the equation. The Commonwealth of Israel from the time of Moshe until the election of Shaul as king. So we read about that today when Mordei Shebaniah read from 1 Samuel. But a theocracy is a system of government in which priests rule in the name of the Most High. The beautiful thing about Israel is that we are told that we are a kingdom of priests. So everyone has a role in the rule, okay? So let's keep that in mind. So what did this mean? Quite simply that Yah, not man, was Israel's king. Back to the article. This is 1 Samuel 8:20, but then 10:19, and then 1 Samuel 12:12. Gideon understood this. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, you and your son and your grandson also. You have saved us from the hand of Midian. Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. Yah will rule over you. This is from Judges 8:22 and 23. This is the type of governance we need to start understanding and thinking, but this starts when we'll get to where it starts at. Theocracy was the rule of Yah over men. That is the granting of supremacy by creator, creature, to an unselfish creator, a being whom absolute power cannot corrupt, indeed, who will only govern us non-impositionally and voluntarily. So we have to enter into the kingdom and assume the yoke of it. This is what the Shema is to be recited twice a day for, because it is us assuming the yoke of the kingdom around our necks so that we are bound by its principles, by its laws, and we carry those laws forth in a self-governed first state that allows then the kingdom to completely come about. I want to find something before we read. And M7 used to read it all the time, but we're going to get back to that before I get done with this particular presentation. The period of Judges, though. The period of the Judges is difficult to place if the late date 1200 BCE for the Exodus is chosen. Kevin P. Edgecombe argues convincingly for the early Exodus date, which is 1440 BCE, and places the time of the Judges approximately from 1350 BCE to 1108 BCE. The reign of the different judges is divided into eastern and western areas. You can read that book there, and you can see a website that has an article related to it there. The coming of the monarchy, the transition to Israelite monarchy, is especially outlined in 1 Samuel chapters 8 through 12. The prophet Shemuel had appointed his children to follow him in the office as Israel's judge/deliverer. Sadly, their immoral behavior was not known to Shemuel. Under their administration, the nation was chafing and began looking to neighboring nations for models of governance. This is where we started to fall off. We looked to other nations for their model of government, which is not what Yah intended to be. At last, they appealed to Shemuel to provide them a king. They desired to defer the responsibility that the theocracy had enjoined upon them. Each person had a major responsibility to the kingdom, but instead they wanted to defer that, even to defect from that, and put the responsibility on one individual. Their rejection of leadership by judges was actually a rejection of Yah as their king. Quote, they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. End quote. 1 Samuel 8:7. At Yah's command, Shemuel dutifully outlined to them the depredations that would result to the people by changing to a system of human monarchy. The people rejected the warning, of course. They said, quote, nay, but we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles, end quote. This was also a political move because, now that thinking about it, and we had spoken about this recently here in Kansas City, that it was a politically expedient move for them because they saw these other nations with their kings conquering, particularly the Philistines, who had kings, and they were, of course, going back and forth with Philistia, just throughout battles. Ark got captured, so on and so forth. So they were like, man, we need a king to become a political entity with a power as well. Because we just got these judges. I don't know. We got more rulers, so to speak, more leaders in position than one particular person, but we need to centralize this in an individual. So Israel as a nation thought, which was completely not what Yah had intended. So when in the first ceremony of renewal, the first king is crowned, Yah's prophet proclaims, ye have this day rejected your mighty one. In the second ceremony of renewal, Shemuel pointed out again, quote, when ye saw that Nahash, the king of the children of Ammon, which means serpent, by the way, came against you, ye said unto me, nay, but a king shall reign over us, when Yah, your mighty one, was your king. At last Shemuel declares, quote, now therefore stand and see this great king, which Yah will do before your eyes. Is it not wheat harvest today? I will call unto Yah, and he shall send thunder and rain, that ye may perceive and see that your wickedness is great, which ye have done in the sight of the Most High, in asking you a king. So Shemuel called unto Yah, and Yah sent thunder and rain that day. And all the people greatly feared Yah and Shemuel. And all the people said unto Shemuel, pray for thy servants unto Yah, your mighty one. Listen to how they identify Yah, your mighty one, not ours. This is what the people are saying, that we die not. We have added unto all our sins this evil, to ask us a king. End quote. 1 Samuel 12:16-19. Hosea makes clear that the transition from theocracy to monarchy was more punishment than endorsement. Where now is your king to save you in all your cities? Where are all your rulers, those of whom you said, give me a king and princes? I gave you a king in my anger. Hosea 13, 10, and 11. Judges chapter 2 clarifies. Now keep in mind, this is about the offering of governance or nation building and the offering of leadership. This is what this is all about. All right, Slicha, if I can be heard, give me a 4. Yeah, I don't know what happened. It just timed out on me. Okay, you all heard me read about Hosea, right? If you heard me read about Hosea, give me a 1. Okay, good, 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 good. So Judges chapter 2 clarifies. The statement at the end of Judges that in those days there was no king in Israel, every man did that which was right in his own eyes, should be read in light of Judges chapter 2. Verses 1 through 5 of that chapter outline how Yah delivered Israel and was faithful to his covenant, but that Israel was disobedient. In response to their unfaithfulness, Elohim warned them that he would no longer drive out the inhabitants of the land. Verses 2 through 6 tell of the death of Yehoshua and the rise of a generation having no memory of Yah's deliverance of Israel. Verses 11 through 15 speak of the spiritual degeneration of Israel, Elohim's anger, and how he gave them over to plunderers. The next section of the narrative is particularly insightful. Quote, then Yah raised up judges who saved them out of the hand of those who plundered them. Yet they did not listen to their judges, for they whored after other mighty ones and bowed down to them. They soon turned aside from the way in which their fathers had walked, who had obeyed the commandments of Yah, and they did not do so. Whenever Yah raised up for judges for them, Yah was with the judge, and he saved them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For Yah was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who afflicted and oppressed them. Yes, indeed. But whenever the judge died, they turned back and were more corrupt than their fathers, going after other mighty ones, serving them and bowing down to them. They did not drop any of their practices or their stubborn ways. Judges 2, 16 through 19. The judge was a deliverer. He was a Moshiach. Okay, not Mashiach, as Elder has pointed out. He was a Moshiach. Okay, he was raised up by the Most High from among the common people. Listen to that. He and sometimes she, Deborah, yes indeed, which is different than the word Mashiach. Okay, a Moshiach, as M70 just typed in, is a deliverer. A Mashiach is the anointed. This is where you read in the book of Yoel, I believe it's no Slicha. It is Obadiah. It says, "And Moshiachim and deliverers shall come to the mount of Zion to judge the mount of Esau, and then they will give the kingdom back to Elohim." So these are people raised up from among the common people. So this is the captivity returning to Mount Sion to judge Mount Esau and then give the kingdom back to Yah. That's the process. This is what we're reading about. This is why we have to rethink governance. This is why we need to understand the role of leadership, the offering of leadership, because we all have a role to play in this. Not just the elders in the Morim, but everyone. So again, he and sometimes she, we saw Queen Nzinga, she was a deliverer, led the nation and brought freedom from oppression. That is what salvation is, people. To be delivered from your enemies, which does include sin and death, not to take that out of the equation. But deliverance is from our enemies. The judge led temporarily. After the deliverance, he returned to life among the people. They didn't elevate him. He wouldn't allow it to be elevated. After Gideon defeated the enemies, he's like, I'm not going to rule over you nor my sons. Yah rules over us. He didn't take it to his head. There was no development of bureaucracy or state machinery and mechanisms. It was an organism that was arranged and ordered and well oiled and operated effectively according to Torah. The judge was raised up by the Most High, and in his delivering activities, Yah was with the judge. No provision was made to elect rulers or to continue any royal lineage among the judge's descendants. And yet, judge after judge and generation after generation, when the judge died, the people returned to the very behaviors that had led to the withdrawal of divine protection. A dog returns to his vomit, and a fool simply goes back to his ways. M70 just read that. He just read that from Mishlei and from 2nd Kepha, Proverbs and 2nd Peter. So let's connect these dots. Time and again, the people abandoned the Most High. The conclusion that some have drawn, that every person doing what they thought was right in their own eyes, is a condemnation of the lack of centralized state power, is not sustained by the text. It's completely erroneous for them to assume that. In fact, the centralization of power in a king or a state is corrupting in its influence. It's the corruption when governments get centralized. That's not African, by the way. That is not African. That is Western. As has been observed, quote, Yah desired his people to look to him alone as their lawgiver, as their judge, as their king. I'm adding that there. This is Isaiah 33:22. And their source of strength. Feeling their dependence upon the Most High, they would be constantly drawn nearer to him. They would become elevated and ennobled. They would, the entire nation, would become elevated and ennobled. My. They don't want to hear that. All right. How about now? If I can be heard, give me a 4. If I can be heard, give me a 4. Man. That's crazy. Really, really. How about now? If I can be heard, press 4. Okay, if I can be heard now, give me a 4. No sound. You can hear me now in 70? Okay. I can be heard. Shabbat Shalom, Gabriel. They didn't want us to hear this here. I'm going to go back to this quote. It says, Yah desired his people to look to him alone as their lawgiver, and I added to the equation earlier, their judge and their king, and their source of strength. Feeling their dependence upon the Most High, they would be constantly drawn nearer to him. They would become elevated and ennobled. The entire people would be, not just the judge, the entire people would be elevated and ennobled, fitted for the high destiny to which he had called them as a chosen people to be a kingdom of priests and a set apart nation. But when a man was placed upon the throne, when a president came into the equation, when a prime minister came into the equation, when a king came into the equation, it would tend to turn their minds of the people from Yah. They would trust more to human strength and less to divine power. And the errors of their king would lead them into sin and separate the nation from Elohim. And this is a quote by Ellen G. White, Patriarch and Apophis, end quote. A human sovereign over the people would turn the minds to human strength and away from divine power. Errors in monarchical leadership would influence the nation to depart from Yah. It was the last thing they really needed when their dangerous motives for desiring a king are considered. Ellen White again, quote, when the Israelites first settled in Canaan, they acknowledged the principles of the theocracy, and the nation prospered under the rule of Yehoshua, ben Nun. But increase of population and intercourse with other nations brought a change. The people adopted many of the customs of their heathen neighbors and turned and thus sacrificed, there it is again, to a great degree, their own peculiar holy character. So this sacrifice that they made was one of error. It wasn't an offering to the proper in the proper direction. The what that was sacrificed was wrong. So we read the why, what, when, how, where, the sacrifices. The what that was sacrificed in this case, as far as for a leader, was in error. And their holy character. They gave that up as a nation. Gradually, they lost their reverence for the Most High and ceased to prize the honor of being his chosen people. Attracted by the pomp and display of heathen monarchy, they tired of their own simplicity. Jealousy and envy sprang up between the tribes. Internal dissensions made them weak. They were continually exposed to the invasion of their heathen foes. There goes that division again. The unification was lost. Here's the problems. And the people were coming to believe that in order to maintain their standing among the nations, the tribes must be united under a strong central government. As they departed from obedience to the Most High's law, the solution, they desired to be free from the rule of their divine sovereign, and thus the demand for a monarchy became widespread throughout Israel. Centralization of human power tends ever to corruption and exploitation. It always leads to corruption and exploitation. It tends to elevate fallible leaders who think to create new rules for the people, new machinery, legitimizing their exercise of authority. Quote, the government of Israel was administered in the name and by the authority of Yah. The work of Moshe, of the 70 elders, of the rulers and judges, was simply to enforce the laws that Yah had given them. They had no authority to legislate for the nation. Thus, this was and continued to be the condition of Israel's existence as a nation. From age to age, men inspired by Yah were sent to instruct the people and to direct in their enforcement of the laws. In conclusion, the problem in the time of the book of Judges was not that there was not enough government, but that the people were very stubborn. When Yah removed the power of their oppressors, Israel returned to wicked ways and became yet more wicked. They disregarded Yah's plan and followed only their own desires. They did what was right in their own eyes. Again, the problem was not that there was not enough government. It was rejection of the form of social order that Yah had specified. Once again, we read this here. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, you and your sons and your grandson also, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian. Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. Yah will rule over you. There was a turn from theocracy to monarchy, and it was a turn very much for the worse. But if men insisted on forming a state, Yah would not force liberty upon them. He would let them go into bondage for a while. And still, after 6,000 years, we are only starting to get his lesson. So, call Israel. Let us learn the lessons of the past. Let us seek to implement the solution of returning to Torah, each and every one of us individually. Let us look to those who are wise. Let us look to those who are experienced. Let us look to those who are strong. Let us look to those who are dedicated and faithful as leaders of this kingdom. Let them help ourselves pull all of us out of this mire that we have sunken into, free ourselves from the enemies that we have incurred, and become free to serve Yah and worship him in spirit and truth. Yes, indeed. For it would have been better for them not to have known the way of righteousness than having known it, to turn from the set apart command delivered unto them. For them the proverb has proved true. A dog returns to his own vomit, and a washed soul returns to her rolling in the mud. Let us cleanse ourselves and become as we are purposed to become. In 70, if you would please, let's go to 1 John 3. And I believe it's like the first 5 verses of 1 John 3. And I'm going to conclude on this part. Yes, indeed, that's exactly it. See what love the Father has given us, that we should be called the children of Elohim. For this reason the world does not know us, because it did not know him. Beloved ones, now we are children of Elohim, and it has not yet been revealed what we shall be, but we know that when he is revealed, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And everyone having this expectation in him cleanses himself as he is clean. Everyone doing sin also does lawlessness, and sin is lawlessness. And you know that the Son of Elohim was manifested to take away our sins, and in him there is no sin. This is our solution, Israel. Turning to the Master, becoming like the Master, according to the word, for he is the word, and the words which he speaks are spirit and life. So when we walk in the spirit, we are walking in Torah. When we are walking in Torah, we are fulfilling the commandments. When we fulfill the commandments, we reflect the image and likeness of Yah, which is again the divine intelligence and perception of Yah. And we become that which we were created to be. And then the kingdom is restored. It sounds simple, yes it does, but the reality of the matter is we have a great challenge before us. And that, yes indeed, is Hebrew vision. And as this challenge awaits us to unite in Mashiach, let us cast aside all that would bind us and shackle us as relates to sin. Let us free ourselves from that which we have become entangled with. And let us turn to the Most High in prayer and stand on His word. And let that truly give us a new heart and restore a steadfast spirit within us. For that is how all of this will be turned around. And that is how the kingdom will be birthed first within each and every one of us. And then that reality will emanate from us into the world. And the manifest presence of Yah will be undeniable. So I pray that what has been presented here today, the offering of leadership and nation building, has been to your edification, has been to your upliftment, has been to your inspiration and to your insight. If there's been anything done in error, please continue to be patient with me. As M70 said as well, I'm still working out my salvation with fear and trembling and dealing with myself and learning to submit and subject myself under the authority and sovereignty of Yah in the name of Yahushua, in the position of Yahushua. And if there's been anything truly of praise, give all of that esteem to Abba Yah. For I am just a vessel, just an instrument to be used so that not only you can be enlightened, but I can be enlightened myself, because I need to receive this message first, as this is first for me. We have a lot of kinks to work out individually. I myself have a lot to work out individually to get in order. But those in the Holy Land, everything is in motion to see you for the Pesach. So I pray that I see your faces soon. And with that, I'm going to close out with a Hatzi Kaddish. And we'll give the mic to the next speaker. Yikadav v'yikadesh shemei rabah. V'yalmadi barak herotei v'yamelech malchutei. V'chayikunu v'yamichunu v'kayedu kol beit Yisrael. Bagalav dizman kari v'yimeru. Amen. Yeheshmei rabba mavorak le'olam ulmei almaya. Yit barak v'yishtabach. V'yita'ah v'yit ramam v'yit naseh. V'yitadar v'yitalei v'yitalal shemei l'kudeshah. Berichu. Ela min kol barakata bashirata, tushbekata banekmata, damiran b'shem Mashiach Yahoshua, Baruch Hashem, hallelujah, Vimeru, amen. I see your hand, my brother from another mother. I want you all to please get comfortable. Keep your ears open. As next to the microphone is my Moreh. Yes, indeed. His name is Shebaniah ben Yehuda. So please keep your belts on, because it's going to get turbulent. That's going to get deep, though. So I'm looking forward to hear what you got to say, if this is what I think it is. So with that, I relinquish the mic. One love to everybody. Shabbat Shalom. Shavua Tov.